Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview. Another highly requested author I've had here for the channel has been Rebecca Kuang, the author of The Poppy War and The Dragon Republic, and the upcoming Burning God. I got that right, correct?
The Burning God, yes.
Awesome. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Dan. And quick correction, my last name is actually pronounced Kuang, as if there's a W in it. Like King Kong, but King Kuang.
The continued streak of me mispronouncing names continues on. Sorry about that.
But it's hard to get right.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I have really enjoyed your series so far. The Burning God, particularly, I found to be an incredibly engaging read, and impressive how much you were able to get done in one book. Starting off, thank you for contributing to the genre and putting another entry in that has been causing conversation, from every big fantasy I know, really enjoying the material and giving their thoughts and opinions on it.
Well, thanks so much for reading. That's really nice of you to say. And I just finished a draft of The Burning God, and we'll send that to my editor in a couple of days. So that's done, that's finished, it's out there, and it will, in fact, be coming out this year.
Wow. So the first draft is done.
Yeah. Feels good.
That's amazing. Yeah, I imagine. Now, is it go to a bunch of editors, you get notes and feedback? Is that kind of the process it's in now?
Yeah, so my agent is also very editorial, so I'll get her notes first, and then it'll go at the same time to my editors in the US and the UK, David and Natasha. It's kind of a weird setup because I have two editors at the same imprint, so they both put input, and they both have like very different sensibilities, so it's kind of a balancing act. So we'll go through a couple rounds of that. Ultimately, I'll come down to like what story directions that I'm most comfortable with, but I haven't had a major disagreement with any of my editors so far. So yeah, it'll be a couple rounds, and I think that will take a few more months. And then I'll do copy edits, and then hopefully by this summer there will be galleys available for reviewers.
That's so cool and really great to hear. So I had quite a few questions sent in from my audience here. If you don't mind to go ahead and jump into a few of these. So this is from a patron I have, Hanko, who said the Chinese aesthetics and history are obviously a very rich source to pull from and arguably underrepresented to Western readers. What other works/authors is she keeping her eye on in the space? What other histories and cultures would you like to see written about?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I made a whole list for this. I think for Chinese aesthetics, there's obviously Ken Liu's The Dandelion Dynasty, and the first two books have been out for a while. And I actually read the first one, The Grace of Kings, when I was drafting The Poppy War. And it was the book that convinced me that there was a space in like mainstream fantasy for Chinese-inspired literature. So I mean, like Ken's a big mentor and role model for me. So it's cool that we're finally getting the third book, which we have a title for. It's The Veiled Throne, and I'm very excited because I love the first two. Then there are two novellas coming out from Tor, which is just killing it in the novella space. And the first one, which I read an arc of, is called The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Ning Vo, and I definitely got that name wrong. I've not met the author, but it is about a concubine empress who's exiled and leads a secret rebellion from her exile, and it's about the ways in which women in traditional patriarchal Asian cultures, especially women in the court, had subtle, secretive ways of fomenting revolution and influencing politics, which is a side that we don't really see in fantasy like the Poppy War, which is all, like patriarchal, like guns and shivs and swords. And I really liked it because that feminine side of Asian history is something that we don't get, especially in the Western canon. Then there's The Burning Roses by S.L. Huang, who's an author that I really love for her Cass Russell series. And the pitch is Red Riding Hood meets Ho Yi the Archer. I have not read this. I have an arc of it, and I'm extremely excited because I've liked a bunch of her other work. Then I am also really excited for translated science fiction by Chinese authors, not diaspora authors. And I have a vested interest in this because I also translate Chinese science fiction, so my work is coming out in some of these anthologies, but there are collections coming out from Clark's World that involve authors that I really love, like Chen Qiufan and Xia Jia, all coming out in 2020, so keep an eye out for that.
Very cool. So interesting. You have more there, so I may interrupt. Go right ahead.
Yeah, there's more, because the other part of the question was about histories and cultures that I would like to see represented. We could go on and on about this, but I'll keep it short. think that I would love to see a fantasy treatment of the World War II experience in other parts of the Asian theater,
Mhm.
because we have so many novels and movies about World War II in Europe, right? But like for a lot of people, the Poppy War was the first time they realized that World War II happened in China too, and like the Nanjing massacre happened, and there was a lot of pain and suffering going on in the Eastern Hemisphere, and I'd like to see books on how World War II impacted the colonies in particular, because that was really like the fall of like the British Empire, right? I'd like to see books about like fantasy treatments of partition in India, like the aftermath of World War II, or books about Japanese occupation of the Philippines. Like more Filipinos died during World War II than Americans, and we don't talk about that. And I think those books are coming, and I think people are working on them, and I'll just be excited to get the galleys when they're ready.
It's always fantastic to see like just new cultures, new ideas coming in and inspiring new stories because I love fantasy, but it has been stagnant for a long time in the Western genre. Very just okay, we're gonna kind of pull from the same sources. So seeing these new things come in has been great, and it's happening across the board. And what's really surprising me from that list you said, I'm fairly knowledgeable in fantasy. I never claim to be the most knowledgeable guy. Still haven't heard of a lot of the things, and so now I need to go back and I'll write down. All right, gotta keep an eye out for that one. That one, got it. So thank
That's
you
it.
for all those
You gotta follow
recommendations.
the Tor.com Twitter account because
Yeah.
they're really killing it. Yeah, I think that so like my amateur take on the history of the genre is and I think the first wave is when you could like count all the first movers, like the first big Asian fantasy, and I think that would be Ken Liu and like be it first big Chinese inspired fantasy, especially by like a Chinese diaspora author. I think that would
Mhm.
be Ken Liu. And I think in the YA sphere, that's Cindy Pon. And that was just like a decade ago that those books were coming out for the first time, right? And now I think in the 2010s, or the late 2010s more so, you started seeing all these deals coming through of writers of color getting to tell their own stories. And it's not like the genre is fixed, right? Like the
Right.
majority of sci-fi fantasy books coming out are still by like straight white men, but you've got like these amazingly diverse novellas coming out from Tor.com. You have a lot more queer fantasy coming out. You have a
Mhm.
lot more fantasy by people of color, and it's still in the stage where you could like put them all on a single list. And if you're like engaged in the genre, like you're aware of all the other authors, which is not where I want to be. I want there to be so many authors of color writing fantasy that like you can't possibly list them all, and that's I think what we're getting to. But it's exciting because I think we're right now in the middle of an explosion of diverse fantasy, and it's cool to see.
It is. It's really amazing to see, and it's led to some of the best books I read this year. I mean, Rage of Dragons. I really love the blend of different cultures that happened there by Evan Winter. He kind of just pulled from all these different sources and mixed in this whole new world that just felt wholly different from anything I'd experienced before. And I'm not very knowledgeable in other cultures and stuff, so it made me go off to Google and research all these things he pulled from, and that's something I always am inspired to do. And Poppycore did the same thing for me as well. I was not well educated in Chinese history until then. I was like, well, I need to find out what you're pulling from here, and ended up learning a lot that my schooling failed to teach me. So thank you again for being a part of that wave because it's great to see, and I think is helping educate people inadvertently on events in history that really happened that they would not have learned about without these books.
I just think it's such a good time to be a reader.
Hmm.
Like like my TBR is so long already, and we're only at the start of the year. I'm gonna have no money, but it's so nice to have all these choices on shelves.
So moving on to another question, if you don't mind here, we had from Tamal Dor, who said, who would she consider her biggest influence slash inspiration for the series, and what works were her spark that led her to begin writing? I think you may have kind of addressed this already, but do you have any more elaboration on this exact question?
Yeah, I mean, Ken Liu obviously needs a mention here because he's the guy who convinced me. He and Cindy Pon were the authors who convinced me it was possible. And I did not know them personally at this stage. I just saw their names on shelves. And literally seeing like a Chinese last name convinces you that so many doors are in fact open, even if
Hmm.
it's only open a crack. So there are a couple inspirations for the Poppy War. I think structurally and plot wise, I hate to say this because Orson Scott Card is a raging homosexual. That makes me really sad. But nevertheless, Ender's Game was hugely formative for me. I think it was for a lot of people, but particularly the way that he does dialogue and attitude, and the way that he like juxtaposes very young, immature protagonists with very high stakes and serious problems. Because they're like 13 years old when they annihilate an entire planet, and they're like making poop jokes, right? And like jokes and like making puns at each other. Like the slang that he invents for Ender's Geesh, I thought was really cool because like I'm a Gen Z writer and like I talk in memes, and I think this generation has like just an inherent inability to take things very seriously. Like we have to coat everything in humor, and I think you see that in Ender's Game. So that like very young, immature protagonist in a very serious, horrible situation is something that like comes through a lot, I think, in the Poppy War. Like Rin is not in a position to make any of these decisions that she is, but here she is in charge of ending an entire war. And also people have noticed that like kind of beat for beat, if you move through the plot of the Poppy War, it's just Ender's Game in space. Like, oh wow, like sue me, I guess. Republic is more original, I think. Then tonally, I don't know if you've read Pierce Brown's Red Rising trilogy. I love those books, and I actually hadn't heard of them until I started querying the Poppy War. And the first person to offer me representation was Hannah Bowman, whose biggest client at the time was Pierce Brown, so the best fit for me. So I said yes, and then I fell in love with Pierce's writing, and that really influenced the tone in the revisions and like the language in the sequels particularly. And I think what he does really well is this like epic, serious, almost poetic sensibility. Like he really is taking the attitude of the Iliad to this wacky, crazy like space fantasy that he's spun up. And there's something very male, I think, about that attitude. Like when he's writing lines like "My name is Darrow," like I am the Reaper, I have destroyed worlds, like that is the male hero of the Iliad, and I that's not an attitude that comes easily to me. So it was good to see and imitate and try to bring some of that sensibility to some of my characters to make them more epic and larger than life, which I think he does really well. Then aesthetically, like I gotta say it, I was a big manga fan as a kid, and I think you do see a lot of Naruto and Bleach in the Poppy War. Naruto in particular, like Sasuke is just like all of the characters. And then there were Chinese dramas, especially this one called Xianlong Baobu, which is an adaptation of a Jin Yong novel, and I think the English translation is Demigods and Semi-Devils. And I mean, it's so wacky. Like it's bad, it's hilarious. That it's just like so dramatic and silly and ridiculous, but you know, like I like the sword fights, I like the martial arts choreography, so I worked some of that in too.
Now, I will say I've of everything you referenced that you said kind of inspired you there. I would also point out, though, your books tend to focus on the ramifications of violence, I think, more than anything, at least from the stuff I've read that you mentioned, and the horrors of war. Is there anything particularly that inspired you to focus so much on the aftermath of conflicts? Because I find it to be one of the most impressive aspects of your writing is how unrelenting you are in your very brutal portrayal of what the consequences of this violence is.
I think so. I have two answers to that. The first is I think that's just a consequence of my being a history major. And when you're a history major, you can't just think about the factors that cause the wars. Like you have to analyze how, like structurally, how societies reform themselves after, and how it leads to situations where you have a World War II because the situation after World War I was really bad for a bunch of people. And then second, I think that when you're writing about epic events from the perspective of marginalized groups, like here's one example, right? Like women in warfare, you can't just think about the campaigns and the battles and the abstract top shelf, like what were the political factors that led Japan to invade China in 1931. Like it's a more direct bodily experience. Like you have to think about the trauma of sexual violence in war and what happens after. And my big frustration with the way that these like sexual violence particularly is treated in a lot of mainstream fantasy is that it's a thing that happens for the male main character to witness and think like, oh wow, that's really bad. Like, oh, the enemy is so awful, I must go conquer him now. And there's no conversation of like what happens to the survivors. How do they feel about that? Sometimes they're not even given dialogue, right?
Mm.
And I think like we have to shift towards like I think the bright line between violence as pure exploitative aesthetic and violence as like a thoughtful, deeper treatment of violence in fantasy is if you're writing from the perspective of the people that violence happens to instead of the people who just witness it and move on. And I tried to do the latter, and I hope it worked.
So I think you're kind of touching on a thought I've had for a long time, where the wrong way to frame sexual violence in fantasy is as a moment for your hero to have a heroic moment, to kill the person doing it and rescue the person, and you don't take any time to actually think about, okay, put yourself in the shoes.
Like it's just a really shitty situation
Yeah,
and a shitty thing happening to a person who deserves dialogue
yeah.
and like a future character arc where they grow from that and heal and move on and very often we don't get that, like they don't even get names, and that is so frustrating to me.
So we have another one, if you don't mind moving on to another one here from Risa, who said, knowing how much inspiration she took from real life history, did anything from real life spark the creation of her magic system? If so, from where? So a little bit of a happier question.
For sure. Actually, the magic system is just as rooted in real life and like real religions as the historical plot lines are. Like the idea of like using hallucinogens to access a different plane of reality, to access divinity is something that like people do and people still do, and a religion that I think we should take seriously because I think there's a lot of truth in that. Like opening gates in your mind, like accessing different forms of thought and being and experience. And I mean, like, and that's shamanism, right? Like, this is practiced in China, this is practiced in the US and in South America. And like, it's a thing that we shouldn't just discount as like, oh, silly, like folklore, superstitious magic. Like it, and it works for a lot of people. And I think especially the idea of being able to access a state to understand that the universe is about interconnectedness. I think there is this like big divide between this Western like Cartesian duality between mind and body, which leads to a duality between and humans and the rest of the natural world, right? Which is also related to the Christian idea of dominion, which is that like we as God's chosen like race and species, people have dominion and control over the rest of the planet, which I think is a mindset that leads to a lot of like climate change issues where we don't take the planet seriously, like we treat it as above and beyond it, and it's just a tool for our consumption and use and manipulation. And I think a lot of other religions, particularly Eastern religions, have different attitude towards our relationship with nature and the rest of the world and with other people. And it's less about like getting high and having like cool trips and more about accessing a mental space where you can understand that. And I sound like a crazy hippie right now, but I think there's truth in those attitudes, and people take those religions seriously and practice this. So it is really, I mean, like the whole like calling fire stuff and like burning down, cities is definitely fantastical, but I think there's more truth to shamanism than we give it credit for.
Interesting, interesting. Things that show, using hallucinogens, all these things can change the chemistry of the brain, can fundamentally change how people perceive reality around them in very interesting ways I don't think we fully understand. I mean, we don't fully understand consciousness, the human brain. So absolutely, I agree with everything you said there. But moving on, we have another question here from, oh, yeah, go right ahead.
There's this book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which is about the history of the use of psychedelics in the West, and it gets into a lot of the issues that I just raised, and it's pretty good. So one reading recommendation for whoever's watching.
I'll have a link to it on Amazon right down there below. But next up, we have one that's from Mick. I don't know how to say this person's name, so I'm going to move on. How does she balance historical realism with fantastical elements? Is it something she does by gut feeling, or does she have a super rigid plan in place when she goes into it? So Do you have a rigid plan, or is it go with the flow?
Go with the flow is really how I take every aspect of writing. But actually, this is easier for me because there aren't that many fantastical elements in the Poppy War. Like the whole like summoning gods by getting high thing is the main novum, right? And the way that I approach this is through a paradigm that I learned at a writing workshop called Odyssey, which I highly recommend because Jean Cavellis is one of the best writing instructors that I've ever learned from. I'm going to sound like a marketing pitch, but it's over 6 weeks in New Hampshire, and and one of the things we learned on the first day was you can imagine the speculative element of the world as like an ink drop, the novum, like the thing that's different, right? Like the existence of magic, or the fact that you can bring people back from the dead, or that there might be people in this world who can tell the future. Whatever thing it is that bends the rules of reality, that changes in this world. It's like a drop of ink, and when you drop it into like the petri dish of your world, it causes ripple effects, and you have to think about how that affects every system and every piece of history, culture, technology, etc. Like it seeps into literally all of the structures that are involved in this world. So you just have to think about all of those ripple effects, and like I'm bad at this. Like my agent has to remind me, right? Like if she can call fire, like why is she concerned about getting like driftwood to build a fire? And it's like oh shit, you're right. Like she can push with her hand. And yeah, it's a good like systematic way to make your world seem real and lived in, if that supernatural element is affecting literally everything. And that's how I balance things, right? Like when I take instances of Chinese history to work into Nakara history, then I have to ask myself, like, okay, but like if there were shamans, what would they have been doing in this situation, and how would they have affected this war? And I really cheated with the Poppy War because I just like wrote a history where there was a non-shamanic Red Emperor who stamped out shamanism. So for a long time, you have like secret shamanic cults, but they're not influencing national history in a big way. So I can crib as much as I want from Chinese history without having to think too much about the ramifications of the magic system. And the trilogy, I guess, is when shamanism comes into larger play. And I have to remember things like she can in fact call fire. We don't have to worry about lamp.
So the next one we had here is from Udi Kumara, who said, "What made you want to write specifically about 20th century Chinese history rather than other eras? Like, why not draw more on, for example, Tang China rather than 20th century?"
Two reasons. The first is that 20th century Chinese history is just what I happen to be studying. So I knew the most about it, and it was the easiest to write about. And the second reason is I was inspired to write the Poppy War by family history that I was learning from my grandparents. So I wrote the Poppy War doing a gap year in college. I went and lived in Beijing for a year, and it was like because like most of my extended family lives in China, and we immigrated to the U.S. in 2000. It was like the first time that I'd had like extended conversations with my grandparents and really learned about them. And they were telling me crazy stories about things that had happened to them in the last couple of decades. Because in the 20th century in China, you get like the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, and then Republican China, and then like the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War, and then the Chinese Civil War, and then like the Great Leap Forward, and the Great Famine, and the Cultural Revolution, and then the Tiananmen Square massacre, and like so much upheaval and change just happening within like a 100-year period. And my grandparents lived through a lot of that. Like my grandfather was telling me stories about like when he was like a war refugee, basically like jumping onto the back of a farmer's truck to hitch a ride to another village, and they had no idea he was there, like walking barefoot. There are a lot of like crazy family reunions in my family history between people who thought they'd never see each other again, and that's wild. And I wanted to. At first, I thought I was going to write a family biography as a way to process all of this and get it all down on paper so it was recorded before my grandparents passed. But it quickly became apparent that was not going to be possible because writing a biography requires multiple interviews that I think requires people to revisit past traumas and talk about them in detail in a way that I just couldn't do to them or myself. So refracting it through the lens of fantasy and understanding that way was a way for me to empathize and imagine what my grandparents might have been going through in a way that also allowed me to like make stuff up where I didn't know what had actually happened. So yeah, it's really personally motivated, this trilogy, and I think that everything I write will be. So the next project, which I'm like actually not supposed to talk too much about, will be largely inspired by my dad's experiences at the 1989 revolution, especially in light of what's going on in Hong Kong. And I want to do a treatment of what happens when students who are some of the like who are people in society who are the most privileged, and that they just like get to sit on their asses and read books, but also like the most disadvantaged because they don't have guns, they don't have tanks. Like what happens when they take up arms and fight against the government? Like it almost always leads to horrible consequences for the students. But like, why do we keep seeing this? And what are the consequences of that martyrdom? Those are questions that I've been like, that have fascinated me for a long time, and I really want to work on that next, which I have forgotten the original question. But yeah.
Well, you were so captivating, I forgot it as well, but I think you did answer it. It was what made you specifically want to write about 20th century China. So it was largely inspired by your family, it seems, which is amazing. I think it might be, it's interesting to hear that because I think that resonates with how so many of the emotional beats of your story resonate, because it sounds like maybe you have a very personal tie into making them hit so heavily.
Yeah, the whole first chapter of the Poppy War is actually based on my dad's experiences studying for the Gaokao, which is this. Have you heard of the Chinese national exam?
No.
It's basically like the SAT on steroids, right? So in China, the way college admissions works is not it's not holistic, right? Like you don't write a personal statement about what a cool person you are and join like 12 different extracurricular activities to prove that you're well-rounded and fascinating. Instead, everybody takes the same exam that's like this grueling, horrifically difficult test of various subjects that you might be studying in university, and it's nationwide. So it's seen as like the most meritocratic system, which like obviously people hack, right? Because like richer families can afford to have their kids like study for all hours of the day and hire really good tutors, and poor families like don't have those same opportunities. So it still keeps the upper class at the top, but my dad came from a farming family. He was the first in his family to get past not just like a college education, but past a middle school education, right? And he took that exam and got into Beijing University, which is the best university in China, and that's how he got a scholarship to come to the West. So it is also this tool of like insane social mobility within one generation. Like my grandparents never went to college; they never went to high school, and so like imagine that kind of pressure, right? And imagine what it takes to do well at that exam. That's what was going through my dad's mind when he was a couple years younger than I am now, and that's what Rin is thinking. Like this, doing well on this one test can change everything about my life, and it works out in interesting ways for her. But yeah,
That's
it's all quite personal.
I can't imagine that pressure, especially with so
Yeah, and
young.
like the SAT is bad. You get to take the SAT as many times as you want. Like the Gaokao, like, you really do well, or you take a gap year and study. But there's a point at which your family is like, you know what, you can't keep taking these financial resources. You've got to give up college if you don't do well.
I think the most stress I ever felt academically was essays for getting into college, and that doesn't even compare. Not even slightly. I can't imagine having. I hadn't heard about that. I had no idea there was a test that sprawled across everyone takes, and that's amazing. I'll need to do some research on that. Thank you. So the next one we had here, if you don't mind moving on, is from Shannon Quinn, who had said, I would love to know whether she had a trilogy ending already in mind when she started writing The Poppy War, or does she determine the direction things will go as she writes? So this is something I think that almost every author I've talked to has a different answer to, whether it's yes, every beat was planned out, or nope, not at all. So I'm curious to see where on the spectrum do you fall in terms of planning the story from beginning to end?
I'm like somewhere in the middle, but closer to the pantser side than the plotter side. And the reason why is I cannot get excited about planning out a story beat for beat and having a top-down structure and then going in and writing the scene. Because I can't even write like chronologically. Like in a writing session, like I can't even commit to finishing one scene. I can only write when I'm really feeling it. Uh, when I like am super excited about the interaction that I'm describing, which is why my Scrivener file is just like a which is why first of all Scrivener was a godsend because it lets you drag and drop and rearrange things in a way that you don't really get with Microsoft Word. But that it just like planning things out just doesn't work for me. That being said, I have I don't think in terms of plot or character. I think in terms of arguments, because I was a debater and I also do like scholarship, and I think in terms of like what am I trying to convey? Like what about Chinese history, and am I trying to drive home in this scene here, or with the arc of this book? So I had actually when I started conceiving of the Poppy War, I had a really clear idea of how I wanted the overall trilogy to end. I wanted somebody to follow. I was interested in the question of how does somebody become Mao Zedong, and how do you go from like a backwater illiterate peasant nobody to like a megalomaniac dictator responsible for the deaths of millions. That's such an interesting question, and I don't think that the answer comes down to like they're a sociopath, which is the historically ascribed reason, because that's a lazy and boring answer, right? Like if you can explain away all historical evils by just thinking, oh, this person was just bad, they just didn't care, they were just evil, which is true sometimes, but that absolves so much responsibility and doesn't get into the question of like what are the historical factors at work that make somebody that way and what puts them in power. So that's what I wanted to explore by the end of book 3. So when I was plotting out the Poppy War, I was kind of frustrated because I was like, I need to set up all this backstory for this Mao character Rin before I can get to the cool stuff. So for me, the Poppy War is like the boring prequel novel before we can get to the cool battles and like the cool Civil War part in the Dragon Republic and the Burning God. But then so like I thought I had a really clear idea of where everything was going to go and how the last scene was going to look like. But then a weird thing happened where the more I drafted the Burning God and the more I saw people's reactions to some characters in particular in the Dragon Republic, I realized that I need to make certain other narrative choices to make things satisfying, and it will veer too far into spoiler zone if I keep going. But there was this conversation that I had with my editor at Worldcon in Dublin. We're just sitting down for a casual coffee meeting, and then I had like a eureka moment, and I started screaming at him. I was like, David, you know this how this has to end. We can't do what we thought we were originally going to do. Like X person has to be the last person standing, and here's how it's going to go. It's going to be this stripped down scene. It's going to be amazing. And he was like, yes, and he started screaming back at me, and people were definitely staring. And I think that some people in that coffee shop know now how the Burning God ends, and I just pray that. But yeah, like so I read somewhere and I don't remember where that the better word for pantsers is discovery writers, because we figure out what excites us about a scene when we're in it, and we make like structural decisions, like descriptive decisions, dialogue decisions, like on the fly, as opposed to knowing it like months and months beforehand. And I think that applies very much to my writing process, because I'm always figuring out like in the moment what's cool about a scene, and sometimes it's like that Michael Scott meme from The Office, like sometimes I'll start a sentence and I just don't even know where it's going. Which makes revisions really hard, right? Because then you have to go back and make it all link up and make sense. But that's my agent's problem, not mine.
I completely relate to that. I'm writing right now, and the hardest thing for me is when I go back to any scene, because I can't recapture the mindset I was in, so I find it really difficult to rewrite what I was writing, because it's like, oh, I was going for something specific here, and it's very hard to place yourself in that exact same, like, okay, I can feel the same vibe as I'm writing it. Like, I don't plan at all. I just have like bullet points of, okay, I kind of want to get here, I kind of want to get here, and I kind of want to get there. So I get that a lot.
Oh, my instructor at Odyssey referred to this as the peaks method of writing, where it's like you've got a mountain landscape and there are peaks, which are like the climaxes of different acts, like the really cool explosive battles, and those are the scenes that I'm most excited to write, and I always write them first, and I have the peaks laid out, and then the rest is connective material to figure out how you get from one peak to the next. And I think this is a very chaotic, evil method of writing because you have, especially if you're writing like non-chronologically, you just have no idea what's happened already or like what information has been revealed. So like my editorial letters will include comments like, she broke her arm in the same place in similar situations like at least 3 times before this. Like, can you like not do that? Um, and I don't know how people write really clean, coherent first drafts because I can't do it.
I have no idea either. So I have to ask though, so there's a kind of a natural follow-up question. Are all like in that mountain metaphor with the peaks and the lows, is there any kind of things that might surprise people to find out are peaks for writing for you? Because like there's the obvious, awesome battle sequences, but are there any more moments that maybe some people wouldn't think of as the most exciting things to write, but really stood out to you as the most enjoyable parts of the story for you to get through?
I think this will require spoiling some parts of the Dragon Republic, but there's like a underlying emotional storyline, especially a relationship between two characters that form like kind of the backbone of the entire book. And they have, so if you just like whittle it down to that plot line, there are like peaks of like Rin and Nudge's relationship too, right? And serious lows. And so when I was drafting, sometimes I'd write those conversations first because they have a lot of big, terrible arguments, especially the argument they have after Rin like gets back to Arlong and they're talking about like the fact that Nudge is a shaman and he doesn't want to use it. And they have like very different perspectives on how you deal with trauma and how you deal with power that comes at a horrible cost, and that like is really the break that forms their philosophies and like standpoints for the third book. I wrote, that was like one of the first scenes I wrote because like that's so explosive and there's so much tension there. And then I just had to figure out how to get them to that point where they really wanted to make things work and they really wanted to stay on the same side, but it's just so obvious that they can't.
Interesting. So it must take a lot of planning and revising again and again and again to earn those emotional, like, okay, the we are getting here as a relationship dynamic as two characters. If you're writing in that sense where you write that conflict first, going back and making it so that you earn it, is that kind of why this revising process is taking a bit longer? Because you're like, okay, I need to go back and figure out how to earn that. So that's, I haven't actually heard someone writing that way, where it's okay, we need to go back and figure out how to earn this conflict between characters. So how is that, just kind of the way you've always been writing, or are you taught to do that?
No, I don't think anybody encourages people to do this.
Okay.
It's just like what kind of works for me. So you know how a lot of people write using like beat sheets? What I will do is do my messy, weird thing, and then go through it and try to construct a beat sheet from that, and then figure out from that like stripped down structure what's not working or what needs to be added or deleted, and then go back and change it to make it a more conventional, like geometrically intact beat structure. So I guess you could think of the whole first draft as just like a massive brainstorming session, but it doesn't become a book until the third or fourth draft.
Interesting. All right. Well, those were the questions I had here. I really appreciate you coming on the channel. It's a blast to talk to you. The Poppy War and the Dragon Republic were amazing reads here on the channel, and I cannot wait for the Burning God. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I had a great time, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right. Peace.